Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to be talking to you about the connected context, which is IoT, but most especially, how do we drive adoption of it? So, Nobel Prize-winning economist Daniel Kahneman said, "No one ever made a decision because of a fact. They need a story." And then last week, I saw this article on the World Economic Forum website that I thought might be relevant for us. It said, why today's leaders need to know about the power of narratives. And they've got this really interesting graphic there, and it says, corporate giants such as Alibaba and Amazon fight not only over retail or fintech market shares, but over the mind shares in the public debate about how technology serves humanity. So you've got a technological solution. Then to help it make sense to people who are dealing with cognitive overload, we're working longer hours, taking shorter breaks, multitasking more. We have many more ways to serve our basic needs. You've got to break through by giving people a simple narrative, something that they can understand. This is what's driven blockchain, these white papers, Satoshi's, which said, blockchain is a way to liberate money from the tyranny of the central bank. And once you can control the narrative, then you can claim the behavior and the profit. So this is why Steve Jobs said the most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. And I think that's why Tesla sent a car into space. So instead of telling us about just electric cars and the features of their car, Tesla sells us into this deep story, which is to accelerate the world's transition into sustainable energy. So it's not about how awesome they are, it's about how awesome you are as someone who chooses to drive an electric car. So that's what it's about. And I think a lot of times in the technology context, we make the mistake of thinking that we're the hero, but actually it's your consumer that's the hero. It's not about what you have to sell, it's around what they care about. So I've got a little question for you, and this is a real question. I want you to meet the person next to you. So before I ask the question, can I just ask a quick little thing? If you don't know the person sitting next to you, please can you just introduce yourself? Because I'm going to ask you to do two things with them. So just say hello. You spent the whole day learning about IoT, looking at the latest trends in technology, hearing from leaders in the sector. Answer this question, just one or two sentences each. I'm just going to give you like 1 minute to discuss this. You go back home and you're presenting to a 80-year-old. So some 80-year-old who's got lots of money, let's say it's like 80-year-old billionaire. You're going and presenting to this 80-year-old billionaire who isn't really tech savvy at all, and they ask you, why should I care about everything that you've seen at this conference? What do you say? Cool. Please go ahead, explain to the person to the other, how do you present to this 80-year-old? Who would say that they were compelling on that question? Who would say like, yep, I've managed to convince the octogenarian investor? One person, well done, well done. So here's the trick. I actually took this down. I was watching this fascinating documentary called The Final Year on Netflix a couple of weeks ago. And there was this line that Barack Obama said that I had to write down. And he said, sometimes we think people are motivated only by money or power, these very concrete incentives, but they're also motivated by stories. So it's important to listen to people and ask them what stories are important to them. So that's the trick. If you wanted to really nail this challenge, the first step was to ask the question back to the octogenarian and say, well, why do you ask? What do you value in the world? And then you can talk perhaps about how IoT solves that. So in this presentation, I'd like to give you a structured framework to help you talk about IoT in a way that inspires and involves people who don't spend their lives in the field day to day. So I'm going to look at it from three lenses. We'll look at it on a trends level, we'll look at it on a tech level, and then finally we'll look at it on a truths level. All right, so trends, aligning with the existing narratives that are in the world. I've heard in 3 or 4 presentations today about the fourth industrial revolution. So this is clearly a buzzword. It's clearly an agenda-setting story or trend that's happening in our context. And I think that it's heartening to understand that we are at the infancy of the fourth industrial revolution. While the concept of IoT has been around since the 90s, it only started gathering mainstream momentum in 2014, and it's likely only going to hit maturity in around 2024, 2025. So, to understand what happens behind an industrial revolution, I love Jeremy Rifkin's model, and I think Jeremy Rifkin explains why we should care about an industrial revolution. So he says an industrial revolution happens when we have a next generation breakthrough in 3 big areas of technology. One is communications. So if you think first industrial revolution, that was the printing press. Then energy. So if you think first industrial revolution, that was steam power. So you can take the printing press and then you can combine it with steam power, and then we can pump out these books. And then the third one that really takes it into revolution scale is transport. So in that case, it was locomotion. So you've got these mass-produced books powered by steam to handle mass production. You put them on the steam-powered locomotion, and suddenly the first wave of globalization starts happening, and that gives rise to mass literacy. Essentially, it's a huge driver of productivity and social and economic inclusion in society. So, you know the story of the 3 previous industrial revolutions. Second industrial revolution, communications was the telephone. Every bit as revolutionary as the internet, if you think about it. The ability to connect people across vast distances in real time. In energy, you have the centralized electric grid. And then in transport, you have the mass-produced automobile. And when you bring all those 3 technologies together, combined with broadcast radio and television, you have the rise of suburban mass consumer culture, which is the world in which many of us live today. So third industrial revolution, you talk about the nuances about it. What's defined the third industrial revolution? Who are the winners of the third industrial revolution? And it's clearly the computer companies, all right? So computers combined with virtually every kind of work makes it more efficient. But then we have had a revolution. Look at the top 10 most valuable companies in the world: Tencent, Apple, Samsung, Google. And you can see that this revolution has happened. The top 50 most valuable companies are completely different now to when they were at the turn of the century. But in terms of energy, we haven't had a revolution in 50 years. And in terms of transport, we're still operating on this old grid. So we've got new software. And all of the winners of the third industrial revolution have virtualized everything that they possibly can. But we're operating on this old school grid. So we're virtualizing what we can. We're virtualizing our relationships. We're virtualizing our work. We're virtualizing the way that we bring transport to us. But in the bigger picture, we still can't virtualize everything. We've still got to eat real food that's got to grow in real farms. We've still got to wear clothes that need to be delivered across a real world, and that's still powered by fossil fuels, and that's still driven on the old school road, rail, and air transport network that's driven by those fossil fuels. So we're waiting for the fourth industrial revolution, which is driven by, in energy, we've got renewables combined with the communications revolution, which means that we can then generate renewables in a decentralized fashion. So no just relying on Eskom, but it means that you have the model that works in Italy and Germany, where anyone who's got a roof can generate spare photovoltaic power and sell it back to the grid. So decentralized, much more reliable grid, variable resources. In transport, of course, we've got electric-powered transport, but also self-driving. So renewable transport and the cost per megawatt hour, as it tends towards zero, we're not as concerned about fluctuations in the petrol price because there's many different sources. And when we combine it to our communications grid, we can move all of those renewable powered vehicles all around the grid at virtually no cost, run by a machine learning algorithm that can optimize everything. So you don't have trucks waiting for 4 days for a shipment to arrive and then driving back to Johannesburg half empty. Everything from the inventory management, what goes into the van, to which van arrives and collects which shipment, what gets loaded and when it gets taken, is coordinated by this communications infrastructure, and the net result is likely 3x increase in our productivity, which means that the prices of everything goes down radically. So this is the third and the fourth industrial revolution that we're working on. And I think for me, like if you look at the stories that really bring this to life, it's things like this smart window. So at Princeton University, a self-powered smart window system that generates solar power through clear glass. It doesn't generate a lot of solar power, but if you imagine every building and every window and every car generating a fraction of electricity and then selling it back in a decentralized grid, it's absolutely transformative. And you can see how that level of competition for power would make the price of power virtually free. So that's why the United Nations has said technological progress is key to finding lasting solutions to both economic and environmental challenges. And then lastly, just relating this to IoT, I think if there was one word for the fourth industrial revolution, it's IoT. Connectivity is absolutely fundamental. The Internet of Things is set to reduce global warming, create jobs, contribute to inclusivity. And one really interesting World Economic Forum study found that as many as 75% of IoT projects are expected to contribute to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So they're going to create jobs. Who's going to install all of those sensors? Who's going to install all of that rooftop photovoltaic power? Who's going to lay the communications infrastructure? So that's going to create jobs. It's obviously going to reduce reliance on fossil fuel and reduce emissions. So the question then is, in the broader context of the fourth industrial revolution and this world that we're building, a more sustainable, productive, inclusive world, what bigger movement is your company contributing to? So how do you find yourselves as part of this bigger movement? So this is the first layer of story. It's the part that you don't have to retell all the time. There's this bigger shift happening, this big shift towards inclusivity, this big shift towards greater productivity. What's your role and what are you playing? The next layer is technology, and we so oftentimes get caught up on this. And without the context of trends that are provided with that 3 to 5 year layer, people can be a little bit lost. So what is the role of tech? So IoT finds itself in this much broader context of technologies. And by the way, they shift all the time. So even companies that we call tech companies like Google they're not delivering the same technology as they were years ago. Their technology-based changes all of the time. So they align with these bigger shifts. So IoT finds itself interacting with 5G, with AI and machine learning, with the emergence of the sharing economy, and with blockchain, and so on and so on and so on. So these are the technologies that I think are the most significant in the shift towards the fourth industrial revolution. How we show our role in this is through the experiments and the ideas that we actually implement. So I went onto the news this week, and I just found stories this week that kind of caught my eye. And these are the technology level implementations of the trend. So in Morocco, Soluna is to develop a 900 megawatt wind-powered blockchain computing infrastructure to bring a clean and sustainable alternative to the current cryptocurrency mining approach. So you've probably heard that mining Bitcoin cost us as much power as was generated by solar last year, which is devastating, but then you combine those two technologies and you get new results. Google, I saw last week announced that they're officially working on a successor to Android called Fuchsia. So, and they've also tripled device support for Google Assistant in the last few months. For me, this is a mind-blowing revelation, because this starts to speak to the idea that we're going to be operating in a post-screen world in a couple of years. We're just going to be asking questions. Like a silly example, but I left my pants in Pretoria a couple of weeks ago. I left Pretoria. I went to Joburg, and I needed to get ready for a presentation that afternoon, and I needed my pants delivered. So this is a big panic. I needed to find a courier company. So I went onto Google. I asked for a quote, and the courier company quoted me 1,800 rand for express delivery from Pretoria to Johannesburg. And I thought, oh, this is such a pain. So I went on to Uber, of course, and I got on the phone. I called the hotel. I said, an Uber's going to be coming and fetching it. I told, they met the Uber driver. He took my pants. It was probably the weirdest trip he's ever had. And he brought it through to me in Sandton. And I had to wait around like a schmo, but at least I could follow them on the map. And I just thought, you know what, I wish that we were in a world where I could just kind of okay Google it. So okay Google, please can you get my pants delivered from Capital Main Hotel to the Maslow Hotel in Sandton. And Google's assistant could make the calls, coordinate with Uber, get the best quotes, and just get it done for me. And of course we know this is happening, but it begs the question, what about people who don't know how to be found on Google? What about the companies and people who don't understand how metadata works, how easy discovery works? Because when we ask robotic assistants to get things done for us, make a booking at a hotel that I like, order me a pizza, where's the nearest ATM? We're just going to expect that metadata is communicated into the cloud, because we're not going to be able to cruise through lots of options as easily when we're in a post-screen world. Another cool story that I saw this week came out of Los Angeles. It was about Agile Buildings, and this is about Glumac, LA, a 17,500 square foot office that produces 3 times more energy than it consumes. So I don't know if you know, but the building industry is the #1 contributor to global warming. So when you start seeing these heartening solutions using Internet of Things technologies, it makes you care. By the way, how they deliver this is really interesting. When you arrive at work, they don't assume that you have a fixed office. You've got your profile on your phone. So if you decide to, most days you might work from home, sometimes you'll work in a different office, but when you arrive at the office, you check in the building, and it tells you which floor your desk is going to be at. You arrive at your desk, and it optimizes your lighting settings, your internet connection point is immediately there, your height settings, everything is optimized for you, and the offices that aren't in use are reshuffled around automatically. Another amazing story around the IoT in action came out of Brazil. So the headline itself is fascinating. So Emotive and Rodrigo Hubner Mendes team up to create a mind-controlled F1 car. So here's Rodrigo Hubner Mendes driving this car with his mind, which is incredible. So what Emotiva does is that it's got sensors that connect to your head, and you train it by thinking left, thinking right, and it starts learning about what left means and what right means in your brain, and eventually you can link that to the car or any other device that then you can drive thinking left, right, accelerate. So here's Rodrigo driving this Formula One car around the track at clip, which is phenomenal, but I think what's more phenomenal is that Rodrigo is quadriplegic, so he can't move anything from the head down. So for me, this is one of the most emotional stories that I've heard around IoT. It gives me a reason to care and connect with the technology. So these stories are often, of course, they're surprising, and that's why we tell them. I think a story isn't worth telling unless it's something that makes us go, oh, that's incredible, what a breakthrough. So the question then to do something surprising is, how are you experimenting? And to quote Peter Diamandis, who wrote in Singularity Hub, you need to build a culture of experimentation. Ultimately, standing still equals death. And the only way to succeed is to be constantly experimenting and innovating. Google's Tom Chi says every time you try something, you're 9 times out of 10 going to fail, but that means you're making 10% progress towards succeeding. So you're just building up those 10% with every attempt. So you've identified in the first phase your 3 to 5 year goals. The second phase is what experiments are we taking towards those 3 to 5 year goals. So then how are you experimenting on behalf of your customers? And then the last layer is truths. Jeff Bezos, who, by the way, if he lived in South Africa, would be a trillionaire, says, I very frequently get the question, what's going to change in the next 10 years? I almost never get the question, what's not going to change in the next 10 years? And that's a really powerful question for people like us who work in fast-changing fields. So he says, as a business, you need to have 2 or 3 big ideas and execute really well on these ideas. So Amazon's big 3 are low prices, fast delivery, and huge inventory. They were true when Amazon started. They're not going to be untrue in 10 years' time. You can't imagine a future where people are going to want to pay more, get slower delivery, and have less options. But it's not the same for every company. Apple, for example, is probably the opposite. Like, high prices, spend a lot of time in the shop, less options. So it's just what's true for you. What are the things that you're competing on? But it's not just tech companies, and this I'm going to kind of leave you with one last anecdote. It's not just tech companies that need to focus on these fundamentals. So look at Domino's. Like, we'd expect Netflix and Amazon and Apple and Facebook and Google to do well, but Domino's since 2010 has grown by over 1,000%. Why? So they focused on these 3 fundamentals. People aren't going to want more cardboardy tasting pizza. They're not going to want slower delivery. They're not going to want it to be less convenient. But how they've executed on those is as a tech company would. So he says, we're as much a tech company as we are a pizza company. I'll point to a couple of the more amazing ones. Like, their on-time cooking is genius. On-time cooking is, if you want to pick up a pizza, you sometimes arrive at the shop and it's cold, or you arrive there and it's still 10 minutes from ready. This tracks you on the way to the pizza shop so that as you arrive, it comes out of the oven. So absolutely brilliant. Another one that's pretty amazing, they have drone delivery, which of course is IoT, but the AI pizza quality checker takes a picture of the pizza as it comes out the oven, and it checks that a meaningful standard of taste is being delivered. Have you got enough salami? Is there enough cheese? So they're using technology in service of this timeless truth: tasty pizza, fast delivery, and convenience. So the last question is, what timeless problems are you competing to solve? What are the things that will never change for your customers? And these are the things that remain true. Okay, so in conclusion, I've talked to you about these 3 layers that you need to use to tell a compelling and meaningful tech story. You base your strategy and your story on the truth. So these are the performance factors that are timeless that we're competing on, whether it's taste or speed or service, not the same as everyone else in the industry, the things that mean something to you. We align with the bigger trends. What's the broader narrative that we have in society? Is it sustainable development? Is it gender inclusivity? Is it reducing global emissions? So what's the trends and what are you aligning to over the next 3 to 5 years? And then lastly, what are you experimenting with? What are you trying and failing at in your 1, 2, 3 model that's going to ultimately serve the customer? And on that, in experiments, be bold. So in storytelling, you are never completely dedicated to something that you have complete confidence in. No one is fanatically shouting that the sun is going to rise tomorrow. So set a bold vision for an uncertain future, but that if we work together, the world will be better off for it. Thank you very much.